To initial set up the MobiCall, open up the configuration wizard from the desktop. You find it by the green color and the tool icon. In the main settings menu, the connection to the PBX can be set up. If there is a Dialogic Diva card installed, the option to set use voice adapters for calls is possible to activate and should be activated to use ISDN over a Dialogic Diva card. If there is no Dialogic card is installed, the option can't be set. In case voice over IP is used, activate the option Use VoIP over network connection for calls. Once active, you need to define how many channels you are going to use, according to your MobiCall license. There is also a possibility to choose if you want to use the H.323 protocol or the SIP protocol. It is also possible to activate both options and define a default route, and if the default route should fail, MobiCall will try to make the call on the second route. Also, the option to activate the CSTA feature is found in the main settings. CSTA must be supported by the PBX and requires a license. Same with the virtual NVE lines for offline processing. This setting is needed for the ANS interface to send many messages to specified DECT phones. In the language settings, the main language for the MobiCall system can be defined. The first option, select the language for local applications, changes the language of the NewVoice programs. The second option, select default language for system voice files, changes the language of the default voice files. MobiCall will use a different default folder according to the selected language: dbvox, gbvox, frvox. The third option is for setting up the default language for the text messages in an alarm. The system can also be set up multilingual by activating the option Activate additional languages for alarms. If set, you can define different voice or text files for every language. Depending on a person's language, the voice and text messages will be transmitted in the correct language. This optional page is only available after activating the SIP option in the main settings. In the SIP settings, the connection to the PBX is set by defining the right model from the drop-down menu. In the domain field, the IP address of the PBX needs to be defined. This is the default domain. The protocol type can be changed between UDP and TCP. Make sure that you define what your PBX is waiting for. On local interface, the local IP address from your MobiCall must be chosen. If the MobiCall server has many network interfaces, use the one which is connected to the same network of the PBX. With the SIP proxy setting, you can define an optional DNS or IP address for connecting to the PBX. If set, no alternative domain can be set up. The alternative domain setting defines a second route to set up an outgoing call if the default domain should fail to make a call. With the SIP registrar, you can define a DNS name or IP address on which the MobiCall server has to register with a username and password. Username is the user to register with on the registrar domain. Password is the password to register with on the registrar domain. With the extended SIP settings, you can define multiple SIP domains for outgoing phone calls. With the channel SIP trunk settings, you can define different domains for different channels to make outgoing phone calls. To ensure that MobiCall can always receive incoming phone calls, a line reservation can be made. That means that MobiCall prevents a defined range of lines from processing outgoing calls and is only available for incoming calls. On this menu, there are 3 different settings to choose between. First setting is to reserve lines from top on, 1, 2, 3 and so on. Second setting is to reserve lines from the last lines on, as example 30, 29, 28, and so on. Third setting is to reserve the lines individual over the post-job monitor. This is where you can define how many and which lines you want to reserve for incoming phone calls. On the next setting, override default settings for channel start mode, rings parameter. You can define for every channel what should be done on an incoming call. Wait for call and answer incoming call automatically. Do not wait for call. Start NV module immediately. Wait for call but do not answer incoming calls automatically. With alerting, wait for call but do not answer incoming calls automatically. No alerting. The next setting is set by default and is a supervision setting. Here can be defined to launch an alarm if more than a defined value. Default 5, calls was done on the same line at one day. Next setting is to restart the line process, NVTVoIP or NVTAF, daily at a defined time or after a defined amount of calls has been made. First setting is to define the global prefix used for external calls. This value only counts for type EXE and type GSM. Default is used 0. The prefix can be adjusted as needed. Next point is to use different prefixes for different voice channels. That means for every channel on this system a different prefix can be defined for outgoing calls. Prefix will be added to the called number automatically. The setting set default calling party number for outgoing calls is to define a so-called clip for every outgoing call from the MobiCall. The clip will be shown in the display when MobiCall is alerting via phone calls. With the auto in, if the phone number to dial is already being dialed or connected to MobiCall, do not dial again activated. MobiCall won't process multiple calls to the same device. Redial phone number if an ISDN/VoIP error occurred for maximum. By activating this function, MobiCall tried to redial a phone if a call should fail or get an error from the PBX by default. 5 attempts. Redial phone number if the dialed number was busy for maximum. MobiCall redials a number on a busy signal. By default the setting, activate the dongle supervision. If no license exists, demo version, deactivate this supervision. Defines which alarm will be launched if no license is available on the MobiCall system. If no license is attached to the MobiCall, the interfaces and phone lines won't work. Deactivate the dongle supervision alarm until the dongle is connected for the first time. Deactivates the dongle supervision alarm as long as no dongle is connected for the first time. If there is a dongle connected, the setting will turn off. Start alarm when the dongle is available again. Here is defined what alarm to start when the dongle is connected to the system again. Start license dongle alarm for temporary license if remaining days on license are below. Defines when the alarm should launch before the temporary license is over. This can be useful on soft dongle solutions, since a soft dongle is bonded to the length of a maintenance contract. Below you can find the activated licenses from your attached dongle. On the SQL database settings, a test to the existing databases can be made. MobiCall tries to connect to its databases. If this should fail, then MobiCall tries to recreate the database. If this should also fail, it can be that there is a problem with the database. Please contact NewVoice support in that case. Via drop-down menu, the alarm which should be launched on an SQL database error can be defined, and also the interval before a launching. By default the alarm 9840 is set, with a predefined text and voice message. It must be ensured that the group is filled with technicians. Delete records from alarm and event database if older than, defines the duration when MobiCall should delete entries from the database. Default is 720 days. The next setting is active by default since MobiCall 7.8. It means that the NVconfig data SQL is used for alarming account persons and for alarming groups. With the data import tool, the persons and groups from an older system can be imported into the new database. With the convert to account setting, the alarm persons can be converted into account persons, what is mandatory for the web interface. Replicate data to another SQL database on redundant MobiCall server is needed for redundant solutions to have the same database entries on both MobiCall servers. The replication is added by defining the IP address from the second MobiCall server and pressing Add Replication DSN. Click on Yes to confirm. With the ODBC administrator, the existing databases can be tested if the connection works. By default, MobiCall scans the hard disk partitions and launches an alarm if the scanned disk spaces should be lower than an amount of MB, 511 by default, or less than an amount of %10 by default. The settings can be changed and a command can be started at alarm launch. MobiCall also supervises the memory, RAM, if enough space is available. If more than 90% is used, then the alarm 9851 will be started by default. Also, the CPU is supervised. If the CPU is constant on 100% for more than 30 seconds, MobiCall starts an alarm. This setting can't be changed. Activate the automatic analysis of the MobiCall server at defined hour and start a specified alarm if an error was detected when active. This box defines that MobiCall checks itself in a daily interval and tries to repair itself if needed. If an error occurs, MobiCall starts an alarm. Activate supervision of the job file handler application watchdog, NewVoice. The NewVoice is for handling job files and gives it into the correct location. If an error should occur, MobiCall will launch an alarm. Activate the live signal supervision, heartbeat files. For device and phone supervision must be supported from the phones. MobiCall waits for so-called heartbeats from the devices and launches an alarm if a heartbeat should be dropped. Activate the supervision of the services for the SQL database and web interface. MobiCall will launch an alarm if one of the following services is not running: NV PostgreSQL, NV, Apache Nevada: PHP Serve or NV RabbitMQ. First checkbox is the line supervision. MobiCall calls itself in a defined time interval to ensure that the phone lines are available. And an alternative number can be defined if the call from MobiCall to the defined call entry on MobiCall should fail. ISDN link watchdog settings. If the ISDN connection should fail, MobiCall will launch an alarm to let the user or the engineers know that the telephony connection at the Dialogic Diva card is down on layer 1. This box is active by default. Watchdog box settings is where the watchdog box can be set up for a supervision of the telephony function of MobiCall. When activated, choose your watchdog box from the drop-down menu. NewVoice is currently using the NewVoice v.24/GSM box. If you should have an older version, you have the possibility to choose the box you are going to use from the drop-down menu. A number to call the watchdog box must be given. MobiCall dials this number periodically, as you set below, to the number field and waits for a busy from this number. If it comes to a busy, the internal counter from the watchdog box and from MobiCall is set back to 0 to not launch an alarm. If the number should pick up the call or do not answer, MobiCall will launch an alarm. If the call from MobiCall is not coming onto the watchdog box, it will make a phone call to a defined number or write an SMS to let the user or engineer know that no phone calls can be made from MobiCall at this time. In the backup settings is defined how and which interval backups are made on the MobiCall system. By default is set that MobiCall makes a backup every Monday at 3 o'clock in the morning. The backups will be saved into d://nvsavebase / the backups can be saved with placeholders like nvsavebase_u where Y stands for year, M for month and D for day. It is also possible to set the backup for every day or specific days in the week. It depends on how much changes are made on the system by the customer. It is also possible to make the backup on an additional USB device like an USB stick or an external hard drive, for preventing data loss when the internal HDD should crash. Also, it is possible to connect a network drive and to save the backup onto a specific network path for preventing data loss through a fire as example. In the extended settings you can define what exactly should be saved from MobiCall. In the message queue settings you can define what alarm should be launched on an AMQP issue. By default it is the alarm 9864. Activate message queues in the NewVoice application to replicate MQ jobs. Activate if you have a redundancy and you want specific jobs to be processed by the master and the supervisor. To check if the AMQP is running and working properly you can click on the button RabbitMQ, then an Explorer should open, Internet Explorer or Google Chrome, to check if the AMQP is accessible. If so you can log in with username and password, monitor. If AMQP is not reachable, please contact NewVoice support for further investigation.